Hey there, fellow fans. This is a fan with too much time here. And just a little update on my health. Everything's getting better. Recovery is starting to speed up. Enough, in fact, that I felt I had the strength to go ahead and make this little video for you. Before I get into it, I want to thank you guys for your comments in my last video on the potential of AI voices within my ongoing series. Thank you very much for those elucidating opinions. And please, if you haven't seen it yet, go ahead and watch at least the first part, and let me know where you side on that debate. I will be releasing a poll soon, and that poll will really help me in figuring out which direction I go in. So, though you might be asking or wondering yourself, okay, but what is this video about? And this video is a little freestyle video I'm putting out to sort of air a theory that, in my mind, is no theory at all, but the evidential facts of how the Force functions. And how the dark side and the light side function. And it's been getting to the point where a lot of people have been asking me a lot of questions, and it's just, I feel I should have a place where I air this out so that people can go and just look at it instead of me having to try to explain it over long form in text. And also, have a little bit more of an entertaining method by which they can learn. Because today, we're going to learn about the dark sides of the Force, of which there are at least two, and the difference between them, and why the Jedi and the Sith fail to parse those differences between them. This video will unveil and decipher the meaning behind the dark side, the corruption of the Force, the secrets behind the power of the Sith triumvirate, the greatest failing of the Jedi Order, the eternal confusion and the self-destruction of the Sith orders, and the true reason why Abeloth is evil and not neutral. Prepare thyselves for Star Wars elucidation. So, in Star Wars, the main conflict has always been framed up as the dark side versus the light side, whether that be through the Force wielders battling each other, or the various armies of the Rebel Alliance and the Empire acting as extensions of those great conflicts. Yet, these ephemeral battles between the light side and the dark side have always been somewhat muddled. The Jedi are scions of the light, and yet they kill, lie, and for all their talk about the power of the light, it is often the case that tens or hundreds, or sometimes even thousands of Jedi die for every Sith that falls. The Sith are scions of the dark, but it kills them and destroys them, despite them being its hands in its own war against the light. And amidst all of that, there's always the talk of balance. Always balance. What is the right answer that explains these confusing conflicts? Should light dominate darkness, or should they share the galaxy? What is the meaning behind balance? The answer is more nuanced than most, even the Jedi and the Sith, seem capable of accepting or understanding, and it often destroys them both because of it. You see, my fellow fans of the Force, there are not just two forces at play in this conflict. There are three, and the third force is not gray or neutral. There are, like I said, two dark sides, two forces of the darker powers, neither allied to the other, who are mixed into this struggle. But to understand this third force, this new dark side, we must first understand the light and what it is, and what it is not. So, let us turn to our favorite, sometimes awesome, sometimes could execute better, creator, George Lucas, the man himself. According to him, the light is not light in and of itself, or goodness, or wholesomeness. The light side is balance, everything being as it should be by the natural order of the universe. This is not a moral force, it is a natural force. It does not want you to live a happy life free of struggle and full of prosperity, compassion, or kindness. Nor does the light side, as described, desire that you be tortured, or your race driven to extinction, or you yourself subjected to physical, mental, or spiritual mutilation. It wants the wheel of life and death, the natural struggle, success and failure, to flow and continue as it would normally within nature. This is why the Bendu and the early Jedi Order signified themselves through the use of the Bendu wheel, a wheel representing the even, balanced cycle of life and death, of struggle and rest. This is the light side. By contrast, the dark side, according to George Lucas, it's the opposite. It is imbalance. It is unnatural extremity, the personification of what should simply not be possible and what is simply unreal. It is the breaking of the cycle into something else, something chaotic, and never before seen, or at least never intended by the natural order. It can take on a myriad forms, a million different incarnations. For while the light side is defined by parameters of what it should be, the dark side is only defined by defiance to those parameters, in whatever shape that defiance might take on. This is the true conflict, as described by the creator of Star Wars. However, there is a deeper nuance here. For while it seems these two competing wholes or forces are themselves whole forces, the truth is more convoluted. For as many of you may likely have begun to pick up, the term light side does not do justice to what is actually being described. The true light side is gray. And it is gray because the light side itself is already composed of two divisions which comprise its vaunted balance. In short, within the light side we understand there are already two halves. Within the light side there is a light side and a dark side already. And here is where the nuance exists, and where the Jedi Order's greatest failure is to be found. We see within the mural of the Prime Jedi that the Jedi once believed in, a true balance, in support of the light side and the dark side together, in a sort of a yin-yang configuration. A belief that began on Typhon and its twin moons, the dark moon of Bogan and the light moon of Ashla. When one side of the Force was favored on this planet, the planet itself would be racked with natural disasters. Yet, the dark side that is represented here cannot be the same dark side that would empower the likes of Valkorion, Nihilus, and even Sidious. You can balance two things against each other, but you can't balance imbalance against balance. That doesn't make any sense. It simply turns into more imbalance. And in this way, the Jedi have an understandable reason as to why they can fail to understand certain things, and why they very rarely, if ever, try to turn Sith to the light side instead of just kill them. Because, well, the Sith will never let go of their power. Never. They just cannot. They will not. And that power is by its nature imbalance, so even if they try to be good boys, even if they try to become moral, even if they try to use the dark side for the greater good, it'll never work. The best case scenario is something like the Light Sith. The Light Sith drove themselves completely insane trying to adhere to both the light side and the dark side. So they don't see a difference between gray when balancing the forces of imbalance and the forces of balance, because there is no gray, just a greater and greater imbalance until you fall over the edge. But like I said, the dark side represented on Typhon is clearly not that dark side. It's a dark side that represented the dark sides of nature, not imbalance, but the things that form the balance on the other side of the counterweight. Things like rage, death, violence, ambition, pain, and despair. And by contrast, the light side, which was revered by the ancient Jedi, was not the force of balance itself either, but rather what we commonly think the light side to be. Representative power which is found in love, life, compassion, selflessness, and pacifism. This is how things began. And it was good for a while. I mean, there was infighting and struggle with the ancient Jedi Order. It never spiraled out of control into conflicts which would destroy the Order, which is good. But there were struggles, but those struggles were more or less what they were meant to be. They were natural struggles. Until a discovery was made by the dark side force wielders of the Order. And that discovery was misinterpreted and ill understood by all sides who encountered it, and it would lead to a perilous debate, if you will. A debate that soon escalated into a schism, and then tens of thousands of years of warfare and escalation. Warfare and escalation we can see reflected across the entire history of the Star Wars galaxy and the Jedi Order itself. It's very easy to understand this once you understand where the misunderstanding occurred. You see, while some Jedi would feel a call to the light, other ancient Jedi would feel a call to the darkness, and they would begin to delve into those areas extensively, breaking barriers they were never meant to break, and reaching for understanding and abilities far outside of the natural order. And like I said, the first to make a massive breakthrough in this area were the Darksiders, delving and making self-perpetuating cycles of selfish ambition that would eventually rend the fabric of the cosmos itself, tearing a hole in the cosmic force and opening a gateway into impossible and unnatural powers. This was the beginning of the true dark side, as we know it today, though it was no true dark side. The true dark side was merely the dark half of life, the dark half of existence. This new dark side, this was where impossible, chaotic forces of cosmic imbalance could be manifested, and where they could be discovered and employed for the very first time. This discovery caused fierce and largely ignorant contention within the early, primitive Jedi Order. Debates that, like I said, led to schisms and then terrible wars. You see, it's understandable, but hard to say that it's forgivable because of what's come of it. However, what ended up occurring is basically this. This power was uncovered by the dark side force wielders of their order, and so it was simply attributed to the dark side, the dark half of the natural order. And it is true that one can only reach this power with one notable exception that I'll get to near the end of this video, I think. But it is true that you can only really reach this new dark side by traversing and delving into the true dark side. So the only way to get to the new dark side was through the true dark side, and the true dark side was just the dark half of the balance. But this dark side, this new dark side, is as anathema to the true dark side as it is to the light side of the balance that's represented by the light side itself. But this was not understood. There was no line drawn, no difference made. The Jedi simply failed to parse it. And because of that, they began to view the dark side of the balance as the same as the perpetual void of the unnatural and horrific manifestation of what was now discovered. And in fear and ignorance and an overabundance of caution, when they defined them as the same, they broke the Jedi Order apart in a way that it would never recover from, and that would mar the galaxy for the rest of time. Now, real quick, before I move ahead, I should probably explain why it was the dark side Force wielders that discovered this gateway, and why it was only through the dark side of the natural balance that it could be reached at all. You see, the two sides of the natural force are balanced but contradictory, and this is one of the better examples of that dichotomy. As one delves into the dark side, their ambition is fed until it is so powerful it's meaningless. Men who sought more power in death and violence to protect what they love destroy what they sought to protect instead. Those seeking greater knowledge become ignorant of themselves and lose sight of what they had desired and why until that knowledge is itself destroyed. The long view purpose of power is just devoured by the short view craving for more of it, and soon, as we see with Sidious's Sith teachings, the common words begin to emerge. Power for power's sake. A mindless philosophy that, in the end, does not empower its followers, but weakens them and leaves them vulnerable to threats and pitfalls they never needed to entertain or encounter. But what avails the one... But you know, why does that happen only with the dark side? What does someone get? What is availed to those who delve into the light side as deeply? What do they receive? Well, in a very similar way, those who try to delve too deeply into the light find themselves driven back from its edge by the very light they are trying to embrace. Compassion and love of life intensify, and selflessness and selfless emotions reach such a fever pitch in the person attempting this that they end up suffering ego death long before the point of danger can be reached. Without ego, or ambition, or hatred, or fear, there is simply no driving force to push them beyond where they reach. Peace, even to a fault, flows out from individuals that do this in the same way that water from a burst dam might flood a surrounding area, and they are without hate towards even those who would destroy everything and everyone they love, or everything and everyone in general. In short, the light side could not be used to reach this new dark side, simply because the very gathering force that would be used to puncture the natural order naturally pushes back against any inclination to do so. Delvers of the extreme light side do not come to try to emancipate people from death en masse, even though you might think, oh, but the light side is a life-giving force. Yes, but lightsiders rarely attempt immortality, and even the Force Ghosts are a very notable exception. Why? Because anyone who delves that deeply into the light side of the Force ceases to believe that death is even real, seeing instead an interwoven tapestry of animation and stillness which composes the single living organism that is reality itself. Whether that's true or pure force-mad delusion is irrelevant. It is what they will see and believe. They will be consumed by it, and thus they cannot breach the surface of reality, for in embracing the light to that extreme, they would cease to be, they would cease to be themselves. They would just cease to be entirely before they ever come close to scratching the surface of the new dark side. So, while theoretically you could do it, it's all but impossible. Again, save for one exception, which I will get to. So, back to the Jedi Order, now that we understand why it's the dark side and not the light side that is the pathway to the new dark side. This misunderstanding between the two dark sides was completely embraced and barred from proper examination by the Jedi, and once that was done, the Order was forever doomed to be weak and hypocritical, with the breakouts in their Order being few and far between. They broke the Force in half and called it balance, yet because of the pacifistic and in many ways self-sacrificing or even self-destructive nature of the literal light side within the balance, they could not actually embrace it without being either complacent or easily destroyed by the threats of the galaxy. Being at peace with everything, even your own death, without caveat, does not make for a good self-defense strategy or a cohesive military order, both of which the Jedi kind of cared about a lot. And so those who did embrace the light side this deeply, they sadly did not last very long, and were seen as fools who misconstrued the nature of the light, despite actually embracing that nature and all of its consequences. Conversely, those who did not were forced to begin a millennia-long journey of tradition and tacit and continuous hypocrisy, forever wordlessly grappling between the two iterations of the light side they tried to follow, as if it were just one, both balance and just the light side of the balance. The light side as one half of the balance makes... It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't make for powerful knights. It makes for very peaceful, very nice monks. So, few, if any, of the Jedi ever were able to see the truth in this, ever to parse out the difference between the balance and the light side, and the light side as balance. However, that doesn't mean they didn't lean. In fact, it's extremely rare to find examples of a person with one foot on one side and one foot on the other, leaning perfectly on both concepts even as they misunderstand them. It is more often the case that they would lean to one side or the other. And well, this is like a member by member thing. The Jedi Order or the Jedi Council could try to encourage a certain kind of Jedi teaching, but when I looked through the various sources I have, I just kept finding examples of it not being consistent and not really being directly addressed, because it's not even directly understood as a misunderstanding. So, like I said, it's extremely member to member, case by case. Those who leaned closer to the interpretation of the balance gained a considerable amount more power and understanding. If they were leaning on the idea that the Force represents balance, they were notably more powerful. And this idea that they leaned closer, that lean can take the shape of many, many different kinds of things. Some examples are Mace Windu, Master Yoda, Revan, and Luke Skywalker, of course, all of whom would come to internalize the idea that in one way or the other, the cycle of life and death included darkness and powerful emotion, and that by harnessing them as part of the natural order, the light side, as they understood it, was empowered. This is why Yoda advised Anakin to make peace with life and death, despite the Jedi being renowned healers. This was why Mace Windu became one of the greatest Jedi battle masters in the history of the Order, despite scant experience in the extremity of warfare compared to many of those who came before him in that history. This is why Revan, the prodigal knight, both Sith and Jedi at once, wielded such incredible power and influence. All of them, in their own way, embraced darkness as part of the light, whether it be the darkness of others, the darkness within themselves, or the inherent darkness of inevitable death. Unfortunately, this never came full circle to full reconciliation of understanding in all but a few maybe exceptions, and those are generally temporary exceptions at best. Perhaps with like one of the exceptions being maybe Grandmaster Luke Skywalker, who at least innately understood these things to be true and was comfortable to languish in a wordless expression of what balance and the light meant to each other. But most Jedi throughout history would not be able or willing to accept this, and would lean in the other direction more forcefully. The light side, not as balance, but as moral righteousness, as morality itself, outside of nature and outside of the consideration of the natural world, which is often not so righteous or moral at all. For example, a flower blooms, and it is the work of the light side. But when that same flower wilts and dies, it is the dark side. And the dark side must be shunned. Unfortunately, the dark side just described is the natural, true dark side. And now you really begin to understand where this messes up the Jedi Order and why there is such a disparity in their Force understanding and combat prowess. Another example of the dark side, of the first dark side, the true dark side, is Dagobah. Dagobah is a dark side force nexus, and yet life is rampant there. Life is everywhere. You'll be harder pressed to find a place with more like square-inch biodiversity than a swamp, much less an alien swamp with no like facilities or installation on the planet to help cut down on it or anything. Why is it that dark side is that way? How can that be? Why is it that the dark side nexus on Korriban, the tomb world and home world of the Sith Lords, why is it the opposite? It's a dead desert, with the only things that can survive on its surface being things which are eternally tainted by the unnatural, usually through Sith sorcery, like the Sith Hounds. Why is that? Why? Because Korriban represents the new dark side, and Dagobah represents the true dark side. And speaking of Korriban, and the Sith, of course, let me expound on them, for you will find that the Jedi are not the only ones who labored and suffered under this misunderstanding of the Force, for the Sith do definitely also labor under this as well. They make no differentiation between the two dark sides, seeing them all as different depths of the same power. And in a way, they have more reason to like this sounds more correct than the Jedi and their interpretation. Yet there is a flaw in their philosophy, and that flaw, no matter how slight, is what creates the differences between Sith like Marka Ragnos, Ajanta Paul, and Exar Kun, and those of the nature of Valkorion, Darth Nihilus, and Darth Momin, all of whom are pretty unique and have very interesting views of the Force and abilities to manipulate them. And I'm sure Darth Nihilus needs no introduction, but the other two are also very much in this list. And Valkorion, you should know if you played the Star Wars Online Knights of the Republic game. So this explains why the dark side, despite seeming to use them, is killing and destroying their bodies even as it does. It is at war with itself, or rather, the two separate dark sides do not abide each other by nature. And because the Sith do not understand that there are two dark sides, they don't pick a side. Their bodies themselves become the battleground between these two forces, both of which represent things that will typically tear you apart. They're not light side forces. So you see the issue there, and why the Sith all kind of look like they're rotting. By now, it's interesting because just like with the Jedi, you have some Jedi who lean on the interpretation of the light as light, and some Jedi who lean on the interpretation of the light as balance. You have a very similar dichotomy within the Sith, By mastering the natural dark side, creatures like Marka Ragnos, Ajantapal, and Exarchun could control and transcend death, leaving behind manifestations of their spirits and becoming powerful Force users to match the strength of any Jedi, or even overcome them. But by violating the true dark side through the use of the new dark side and enthralling themselves to the deeper dark that they find within it, entities like Valkorion and Darth Nihilus and Darth Momin could do much more than just stretch their lives out into ghostly forms, but rather, they could break down and destroy the very tenets of death itself. And in addition to that, not only could they kill death, but they could also reach out and do the absolutely impossible, bestowing themselves with powers and curses beyond the ken of all but the most depraved and mighty of the Sith Lords. They punctured the dark side and found an endless void beyond, a void where anything is possible, but a void like any other. And like any other void, it hungered to be filled, and all three labored their entire lives as Lords of the Sith to fill it in one way or another. It was, it is within this void that fell gods can coagulate and gather, where all laws are destroyed and new ones created, forged, and held in place not by the semblance of some natural, already occurring, existing order, but by pure, sheer, indomitable will. Nihilus is an example of what happens when that will fails. A dark puppet, a maw without a mind, clinging to its own humanity even as it is devoured, and all humanity within and without is taken within and destroyed. Valkorion is an example of the opposite. A will strong enough to not only take and destroy, but erect, build, and keep in place by power of spirit alone those things he could find within that greater void of the new dark side. And Momin. Momin lies somewhere between, enamored with the void he discovered, staring deeply into it as it stares back at him, never blinking, as if mistaking the glare of nascent, unfathomable evils as the tender stare of a lover's eyes. And yet, none of them, save perhaps Valkorion in some way, truly understood the difference in what they were toying with, and even as they leaned powerfully into the new dark side, always they would leave a foot standing on the true dark side. And it's by that metaphorical foot that they were slowly unmade, unwound, and transformed into walking corpses. There's a reason why Darth Vader fell to the dark side and fell to the light side. Darth Vader never fell to the corrupting power of the new dark side. Darth Vader only ever fell to the true dark side. That's why he's the chosen one, an embodiment of both powers. He was an embodiment of the true light side and the true dark side, alternating between them, but never going beyond that breach level, which is why Darth Vader never became legitimately more powerful than Palpatine. He simply never went to the place Palpatine and most other Sith that are powerful end up going. So, yeah, this finally brings us to the one, the only, Abeloth, the chaos goddess and most powerful representation of the new dark side within all of Star Wars lore. She drank of the font of power and bathed within the font of knowledge, believing it would make her powerful enough to save her family, to give her ultimate power and ultimate unlimited balance. Abeloth is perhaps the only individual in all of galactic history to have not only successfully breached the extremity of the new dark side by way of the light side, but also to break both simultaneously, reaching imbalance and tearing herself apart by delving into both halves at the same time. They did not balance, they just tore themselves apart. And thus you see a mad, raving goddess able to dissolve and reform reality nearly on a whim. That is what makes Abeloth so powerful, and so capable of doing the impossible. She is the dark side, the new dark side, through and through, because she tried to encompass the light as well, taking both to their highest extremes, and breaking the walls on either side as a result. Very, very few beings in all of Star Wars, Jedi or not, understand the true nature of the Darksides and the Lightside, and the balance that needs to be formed somewhere between them. And those who were even capable of scraping across that truth are known to myself and fellow fans as the mighty Grey Force wielders, men and women like Grand Master Luke, Darth Treya, the ancient Bendu, the famously stated one in the middle. The knowledge of the true order may now forever be lost. For in over 25,000 years of galactic history, who now has the bravery and the vision to see the Force for what it really is? And who could ever aspire to it before being corrupted by the mistakes of the Jedi and the Sith? The true Jedi Order is dead. And the Sith never truly lived. But there was at least one being who seemed to fully understand. That being was the father of Mortis. And by the bane of imbalance and the sting of betrayal, he is now past. His successor, the Chosen One, will never inherit his throne of knowledge. The Star Wars universe is, therefore, well, trapped by it, never able to actually solve the cause of their perpetual fighting. The stars themselves will blaze with war, evermore, because Anakin will never be the one who brought balance, because in this universe, no one even understands what balance even means. Or at least, those are my thoughts on the matter. Please tell me what your thoughts are. Do I have a point here? Do you have a counterpoint or disagreement? Please voice it civilly in the comments down below. And until the twin suns rise again and a new video is ready for your enjoyment, all I can say is, I will see you next time.